It was raining the day I stood in front of the casket. Not that soft, poetic kind of rain that people write about in novels, no. This was sharp rain, cold, straight, and loud. Like the sky itself was furious. I remember standing under the black canopy with my uniform still damp. The shoulders weighed down by both water and memory. My gloves were stiff. The air around the cemetery smelled like mud, old roses, and secrets nobody wanted to keep anymore. Across from me were the same relatives who once laughed when I told them I'd joined the army. Now, they stood in silence, eyes hollow. Some still had that same smirk, though fainter, softer, like guilt had carved it into something else. I looked down at the casket and thought of the last time I was in this town, 15 years ago, back when I still called it home. I wasn't the golden child. That title belonged to my cousin Mark. Ivy League, white collar, wore cufflinks at 19. Everyone else the aunts, uncles. My father orbited around him like he was the only son in the family. I was just the kid who kept to myself. I played with walkie-talkies, got in trouble for sneaking into the neighbor's tool shed, and once wrote a book report on the art of war in 7th grade. They didn't know what to make of me. I wasn't a failure. Exactly. I was just invisible. When I told them I'd enlisted, it was during Christmas dinner. Ham, potatoes, too much wine. My mother had just passed the gravy when I said, quietly, I leave for basic in January. Forks paused mid-air, and then came the laughter. Mark was the first to chuckle. What? Couldn't get into community college, he said. My father didn't laugh, not audibly, but he gave that smile, the one that said he wasn't surprised, the one that made you feel small. You'll quit, my Aunt Sarah added, shaking her head. You never stuck with anything. I remember my hand tightening around my glass of water. I remember the sting in my eyes, but I didn't let it fall, not in front of them. I just nodded and kept chewing. They all went back to talking about stocks, promotions, summer homes. Nobody asked where I'd be deployed. Nobody asked what job I was training for. Not once. The funeral was for Mark. Yes, the same Mark who'd laughed the loudest. He died a month ago overdose, according to the obituary. But that wasn't the whole story. Not even close. When I got the call from my cousin Jenny, I hadn't heard her voice in years. She didn't even ask how I'd been, she just said, Mark's dead. Are you coming? I asked her what happened. She paused and said, You should come. That's all. So I did. And not just because it was family. I came because I'd been watching Mark. Long before he knew I was watching him. After serving 3 tours and working intelligence, I was recruited into federal operations, the kind you don't talk about at dinner. The kind where silence is the job. People change when you vanish for 5 years and come back with clearance they can't pronounce. When I returned stateside, I got curious. Not out of revenge, no. I had buried that anger long ago, but because the Mark I saw on public records didn't match the Mark I remembered. His LinkedIn said finance, but his travel record said otherwise. His bank transfers were off, too frequent, too clean. I followed it carefully, quietly. One breadcrumb led to another. Eventually, it wasn't just about him. It was about who he worked for, and what they were using him for. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Even now. I'm not allowed to say it out loud, but I will tell you this. The man they buried wasn't just someone's son, or someone's cousin. He was a courier for something darker, something dangerous. And I had the proof. I stood at that funeral with the USB drive tucked into my jacket lining. I had already sent a copy to the bureau the night before, and after the last hymn was sung, and the family walked away from the grave, I stayed behind. I dialed a number I had memorized, not saved. I gave them the go. Why did I do it? Because truth doesn't erase pain, but it balances the scale. Because I spent years being the joke, the shadow, the one who wouldn't make it. And yet, I was the one holding the truth they all feared to know. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it because silence can be heavy. And when your uniform carries weight, you learn to carry more than your own. I haven't spoken to any of them since. They sent a thank you note in the mail, just one sentence. Unsigned. We didn't know. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they never wanted to. But I did. And I still do. Have you ever had to do something painful, not for revenge, but for truth? Have you ever stood in a room full of people who once laughed at you and felt nothing at all? If you've ever been in that kind of silence, I'd love to hear your story. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The town looked different without the gray curtain of clouds, quieter, older, like it had been waiting for someone to see it clearly. I walked to the diner just off Route 9. It was the same place my mother used to take me after doctor appointments. Same checkered floor, same squeaky booths, same chipped mugs. The scent of bacon and old coffee lingered in the air like a memory you can't scrub out. I chose the corner booth, the one facing both the door and the parking lot. Old habits. I sat down, ordered a black coffee, and waited. 10 minutes later, he came in. He wore a gray coat, too formal for the place. Short hair, pale face, no ring. He didn't look like someone you'd remember. That was the point. He slid into the booth across from me. Didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake. Special Agent Rowe, he said, low and flat. I nodded. You got the files? They're real, he replied. All of it. I stared at the black swirl in my coffee. They're watching the funeral recordings, he added, tapping his finger once on the table. You were right not to go to the wake. I wasn't invited, I said with a faint smile. He didn't smile back. We're pulling the thread now. But the body, Mark's body, was only the first signal. I looked up at him then. His eyes were calm, but something behind them was burning the look of someone who had seen too much too fast. They're coming down hard, fast. Names we've never seen before, ties we didn't expect. All through your cousin. I didn't speak. I just let the silence settle. He reached into his coat and placed a brown envelope on the table. We're giving you the option to step away now. Your part is done. You walk. We don't call again. Or, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I remembered being 12 when Mark once locked me in the attic. It was a dare, part of some cruel game he made up during Thanksgiving. Everyone else was downstairs watching football, laughing. I banged on the door for what felt like hours. When my mom finally found me, she said I should have yelled louder. Mark just grinned. That attic smelled like mothballs and dust and the sharp sting of forgotten things. I never went back up there, but sometimes I think I never left. I reached for the envelope. My hand hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in my life, I felt something I never expected to feel again. Control. Real. Grounded. Terrifying control. I looked at the agent. What happens if I don't walk? You're brought in. Fully. No exit. Full non-disclosure. International implications. Why me? Because you found him, he said, calmly. Because we trust you more than the others. And because you're not like them? I smirked. That's what they always said too. You're not like us. He slid the envelope closer. You've got until tomorrow. And just like that, he stood up and left. No handshake. No goodbye. Just the soft jingle of the diner bell and the door swinging shut behind him. I didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, I finished my coffee. The waitress Carla came by, recognized me from high school, and asked how long I was in town. I lied, said just a day or two. She smiled, said I looked well. Funny how a lie like that can feel warmer than the truth. That night, I walked past the old house, Dad's house. It hadn't changed much. The same broken porch light, the same swing creaking in the wind even though no one was on it. I stared at the window that used to be my room. The blinds were drawn. He hadn't come to the funeral. I wasn't surprised. After my first deployment, I sent him a letter. A long one. No reply. Years later, I tried again an email this time. Nothing. Not even a bounce back. Some silences are louder than words. And some fathers disappear even when they stay put. I opened the envelope at midnight. Inside were 3 things: a clearance badge, a burner phone, and a single sheet of paper. 3 names, 1 location, no explanation. I recognized one of the names. He used to come by my uncle's mechanic shop. Friendly, always offered me gum. The others no clue. The location was overseas. I closed the envelope, set it on the table, stared at it like it might start whispering. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I thought about all the things I'd done to try to earn their approval. Joining the army, climbing ranks, speaking with medals instead of words. And I thought about how none of it had ever mattered to them, but maybe it wasn't supposed to. At 7:00 a.m., I called the number on the burner phone. I spoke only one word. Yes. The call ended without a reply. They never laughed at my military rank again, because none of them could anymore. But even if they could, I wouldn't care. I wasn't doing this for them. Not anymore. The plane touched down at a small military airfield just outside of Prague. It was cold, not biting cold, but the kind that sank into your fingertips and stayed. I stepped off the ramp wearing civilian clothes, but the badge tucked into my chest pocket pulsed like it had a heartbeat of its own. There was no ceremony, no welcome, just a black SUV waiting on the tarmac. Engine running, lights off. The driver never gave his name. He simply said, "They're waiting." I sat in the back, staring out the window as we drove through narrow cobbled streets. Prague had always looked like a fairy tale built over a graveyard. Gothic towers, statues watching from rooftops, alleys that whispered. It was the kind of city where every corner held a secret, a good place to hide, or to vanish. They took me to a safe house just outside the city center, a plain concrete building dressed up to look like a hostel. Inside, it was stripped of charm. Bare walls, metal chairs, thick windows. The agent from the diner wasn't there, but someone else greeted me. A woman, early 40s, German accent, hair cropped short like a soldier, but eyes soft like a mother's. She didn't tell me her name either. She only said, "Let's begin." We sat across from each other, the table between us cluttered with files, satellite images, redacted sheets, but in the middle was a photo. Mark. Taken 2 weeks before his death. He looked different, older, thinner, dark circles under his eyes, but it was him. I stared at the picture. I thought he died. I said. She nodded. He did. Then why is he in an image from 2 weeks ago? She slid over a new file. This one was heavier. Thick. Because your cousin didn't just work for the network, she said. He built part of it. I won't bore you with every classified detail. But here's what I can tell you. Mark was a tech broker. He started clean, worked in finance. But somewhere along the way, he got greedy. Or scared. Or both. He got involved with people who needed systems off the books, secure communication channels, data blackouts, quiet networks. It started small. Corporate espionage, shell companies, But it grew. Soon. He was working with organizations the government didn't even name out loud. He created silent tunnels ways for money, information, even people to move without a trace. He wasn't the boss. The agent told me. He was the architect. And the map he made. She tapped the table. Is still in play. They needed me because of what I'd uncovered before. Small threads? Yes. But now they knew the weave. The locations I'd tracked. The codes I'd pieced together from Mark's records. I was the only one who'd seen the full pattern because I had studied Mark not as a criminal, but as blood. You didn't come here for revenge, she said. No. You came because you still wanted to understand him. I didn't reply. But she was right. Some ghosts don't leave you alone until you finish the story. My first task was in Budapest. Surveillance. Light work. At first glance. But when we got there, everything changed. Because the man we were following, a Russian asset known as Oral, wasn't just a courier. He was a node. A connection point between Mark's old channels and something new. And in his briefcase was something I never expected. Not a weapon. Not a drive. A photograph. Of me. From 3 years ago, wearing my uniform. Smiling. They pulled me off the mission immediately. I was flown back to the safe house. 2 men stood guard at my door. That night, the agent came in again. She was quiet for a long time. Then she sat and looked me straight in the eyes. They were watching you, she said. Why? Because Mark told them to. I felt the breath leave my lungs like a balloon suddenly let go. She slid a note across the table. 1 sentence. Don't trust the uniforms. Even yours. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mark. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the corner of the safe house, staring at the cracks in the concrete walls. I thought about everything. The attic, the laughter, the funeral, the files, the photograph. And then I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. Mark wasn't just running. He was leaving something behind for me, and maybe, just maybe, he was trying to protect me from what he couldn't outrun. The next morning, I requested a private session with the agency lead. I told her I wanted back in, not as a ghost, but as a hunter. She said nothing for a long time, then she nodded. Fine. But you need to understand something, she said. This won't give you closure. I'm not looking for closure, I replied. I'm looking for the truth. She leaned forward. Truth is heavier than revenge, she whispered. Are you ready to carry it? I stared at her. I remembered that attic. I've been carrying it since I was 12. That night, I burned the photograph of myself. Not out of fear, but to make space. Because the next chapter wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about the map he left behind, and what it would cost me to finish walking it. The trail led to a farmhouse. Not in a city, not in some high-tech fortress, just a lonely, wind-battered house in the Carpathians, tucked between 2 mountains like it had been forgotten on purpose. No roads led to it anymore, only paths, narrow ones, the kind made by deer, not tires. I arrived at dusk, alone. The team stayed back a mile per protocol. I told them I needed to go in first, not for tactical reasons, but because this wasn't just another location. It was his last stop. The sun was low, the trees bare, and the wind made the shutters creak like whispers you couldn't quite understand. I stood at the door for a long time. I don't know what I expected: a trap, a confession, a ghost. What I found was silence, and the smell of something long since rotten. The inside of the house was bare, but not abandoned. There were signs someone had lived there for a while: canned food, a cot, notebooks scattered across the floor. No electricity, no running water, just candle stubs and a cracked mirror on the wall. The air tasted of dust and mold. But it wasn't the mess that caught my eye. It was the writing. On the far wall, above the cot, in black marker, messy, but deliberate, were 8 words. They will come for you. Be ready. And beneath that, scribbled smaller, forgive me for laughing. My breath caught. My knees almost buckled. That was something only Mark would write. A reference. A knife turned back toward himself. Forgive me for laughing. It was his apology. The one I never thought I'd get. I sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the words. My flashlight cast long shadows. The notebooks were filled with lists, names, times, ports, contact phrases. But there were also sketches of me as a child in the attic. One sketch showed me holding a toy soldier, back turned, while another kid him stood at the door, smirking. And in the corner, a question. What did I do to you? They found his body in the room next door. That's what the report said. Overdose. Intentional. But now, sitting here, I wasn't so sure. The record said no signs of struggle, but his drawings, they screamed. He hadn't just run from danger. He'd run from himself. And when there was nowhere left to run, he wrote those words. As if the truth had finally become heavier than his lies. I radioed in and gave the signal. They swept the house, collected the notebooks, photographed everything. But none of them saw the wall. None of them stood where I had stood. None of them knew what it meant. They only saw intel. I saw confession. On the way back, I sat in the back of the truck, hands clenched, staring at the mountains disappearing behind us. I thought about all those Christmases, all those dinners, all the teasing, the silence from my father, the pity from my aunts, the smirks from Mark. And I thought about this moment, how it all narrowed to a tiny cabin and 8 words on a wall. They will come for you. Be ready. He hadn't meant the enemy. He meant them. The family. The ones who pretend everything is fine while rot grows underneath. The ones who laugh at uniforms but hide their own failures in whispers. The ones who raised boys like him and silenced boys like me. He was telling me what I already knew deep down. Blood doesn't always protect you. Sometimes, it marks you. When I returned to HQ, I asked to speak with Agent Rowe. He wasn't available. They said he'd been reassigned. Quietly. No forwarding contact. Another ghost. I thought. They always disappear when you start getting close. I stayed 2 more months in Europe. Clean up. Cross-referencing Mark's notebooks with active leads. Some of the names led nowhere. Others sparked investigations I'll never be able to talk about publicly. But through it all, one thing kept gnawing at me. Why me? Why had Mark drawn me? Why had he kept sketches of my childhood? Why had he written those words? Forgive me for laughing, as if his last thoughts weren't about the network, but about me. The answer came in an envelope, delivered by hand. No return address. Inside a photo. It was old, curled edges, faded color. 2 boys on a porch swing, one grinning wide, the other looking down, holding a toy soldier. Me and Mark, on the back, in ink, barely legible. You always tried to be the hero. I should have let you. I cried, for the first time in years. Not because it changed what he did, not because it fixed the past, but because, somehow, through all the lies and all the silence, he had remembered who I was, and maybe, just maybe, he had wanted to be saved, too. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Funny, isn't it? How time shrinks everything that once towered over you. The porch steps were still uneven. The screen door still screeched like a wounded animal when I pushed it open. And there he was. My father, sitting in the same chair by the window, just like always. The sun cast sharp shadows across his face. tracing every line like a map of years spent pretending we didn't exist to each other. He didn't get up when he saw me. He didn't smile. He just said, "I heard you were in town." No hug, no warmth, just 5 words. Heavy as stone. I stood there for a second, letting the silence stretch. Then I sat across from him. The old couch groaned under my weight. I visited Mark's last safe house. I said, voice calm. He didn't flinch, just looked down at his hands. I read what he wrote. I added, he asked for forgiveness. Still, nothing. I studied him, his knuckles, thick and dry, his jaw, clenched. The way he avoided my eyes just like when I was a kid, and asked him why he never came to my school plays. Why he left when things got hard. Why he didn't believe in me. You know, I said slowly, he didn't hate you. Now he looked up. His eyes were tired, but not soft. He didn't love me either. He said. That stung more than I expected. You ever wonder what made him like that? I asked. Cold, angry, reckless. I don't waste time wondering. He muttered. I do. A long pause. I leaned forward, because I could have been him. He blinked. If I hadn't joined the army, if I hadn't left this place, if I hadn't learned how to survive without waiting for your approval, I could have ended up just like Mark. His mouth twitched, but no words came. I didn't stop. He didn't just die from an overdose. He died from silence, from trying to outrun your voice in his head, just like I did. Only difference is, I made it out. Now he finally spoke, quiet, almost hoarse. You think I wanted you boys to suffer? I shook my head. No. I think you were too proud to admit when you were wrong, and too scared to love us the way we needed. He turned his face toward the window. The air grew thick. I stood. I'm not angry anymore, I said. He didn't look at me. I'm just done needing anything from you. And with that, I walked to the door. Before I left, I turned back. One last time. He hadn't moved. But just as I reached for the handle, he said, You looked good in that uniform. I paused, then walked out. That was the last time I saw him. A month later, I got a letter from the hospice. He'd passed in his sleep. No will, no note. Just one personal item left for me. A photo. The same one Mark had sent me earlier, the 2 of us on the porch swing. But this version had something new on the back. A single word. Sorry. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat with it. In the same quiet way I'd sat through years of being ignored, years of being the afterthought, years of trying to earn their gaze, and I realized something. I didn't need apologies anymore. Not from Mark. Not from my father. Because I had already built a life where their voices no longer dictated my worth. That night, I took the photo and placed it in a small frame, not to honor them, but to remember the boy on the swing, the one who held onto his toy soldier like it was a sword, the one who never stopped fighting, even when nobody clapped for him, even when no one said, I'm proud of you. Because here's the truth. No one tells you. You don't need their recognition to be real. You don't need their applause to matter. You don't need to go back to where you came from. Not if you've already built something stronger inside you. 3 months later, I was home. Not the old house, no. That would never be home again. I'd settled near the coast, a small town, quiet. You could hear the gulls in the morning and the ocean through the open window at night. I had a dog named Ranger. I drank my coffee slow. I started growing tomatoes. After everything, I thought maybe peace was finally knocking, not loudly, just a soft tap, a rhythm I could live with. Then came the message, encrypted, untraceable. Only one line. The map isn't finished. You know where it ends. No name, no timestamp. But I knew who it was from. Mark. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to close the laptop, walk away, let ghosts stay buried. But my hands were already moving. I typed a single code into the field, the same code I'd seen scribbled in one of his notebooks, next to a place neither of us had spoken of in years, Dunridge Quarry. It was the place we used to bike to as kids, just outside our grandfather's land. Abandoned, dangerous. Our secret kingdom of broken stone and rusted fences. And, apparently, the end of his trail. I left the next morning. No team, no backup, just me. The quarry was almost exactly as I remembered it. Jagged edges, quiet winds, and silence that stretched wider than the pit itself. Nature had begun reclaiming it. Grass crept through the cracks. Trees stood where trucks once did. I stood on the ledge, staring down at the hollow earth. Then I saw it. A wooden crate, not buried, just placed, like it had been waiting. I climbed down slowly, each step feeling like a pulse. When I opened the crate, my breath caught. Inside were documents, maps, tapes, a USB drive, and a photo. Another photo of me, but this one was different. I was older. It was taken during my second deployment, the one I'd never talked about publicly. Mark had followed me. Even after death, he was still watching, still warning. I drove to a secure facility 6 hours away, turned the drive over to the agency. They didn't ask how I found it. They knew better. 3 days later, I was called into a debrief room. A new agent, younger, clean cut, not hardened yet. He looked at me and said, "You understand what this is?" I nodded. "This map. It doesn't just expose the network, it traces it backward. It shows how far the corruption goes. How deep." I leaned forward. Names. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it, and there it was. Family. Not just Mark. Not just people I vaguely remembered, but bloodlines. Roots that connected Mark's choices to shadows our family had lived in for generations. Illegal trade, wartime laundering, government contracts, secrets wrapped in silence. Legacy, not loyalty. He wanted me to see this, I whispered, to know it didn't start with him. The agent looked shaken. "You want to move forward with this?" I stared at the wall. A wall just like the one where he'd written those 8 words. "They will come for you. Be ready." I nodded. Yes. Release it. The fallout was nuclear. Politicians, CEOs, a quiet house raid in Zurich, a midnight arrest in DC, 2 embassies shut down. Mark's name was never mentioned publicly. Neither was mine. But I watched from afar. I watched the edifice crack, the silence shatter. And in that, I found something I never expected. Not revenge, not pride, but freedom. You see, the truth is heavier than revenge, but once you carry it all the way to the end, it lets you go. I still live near the coast. The tomatoes are coming in well this year. Sometimes I walk by the water and think about that photo, the one of me and Mark on the swing. And I think, maybe some stories don't need to be erased, just rewritten, with different endings. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for listening, for holding this story with me. I hope, in some small way, it reminded you of your own strength, of what silence costs, and what truth can still return. Have you ever had to face your family's shadow and choose whether to pass it on? Have you ever broken a chain so future generations would never wear it? If so, I'd be honored to hear your story.